Welcome everybody to Lush and Lean. It's so good to see some familiar faces and some new faces. Thank you for joining us. You're going to love this presentation. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure everybody has signed in and that you have an evaluation. We really do appreciate those evaluations so we know what to line up for our next set of workshops. Appreciate that. You've all heard of Utility Hawk, maybe? Maybe you haven't. Utility Hawk. This is for Las Cruces Utilities water and gas customers. It's a free service. You just register. You'll need your customer number, get that off your bill. Once you do register, you can pay your bills online. But what's awesome about Utility Hawk is it alerts you to abnormal consumption. And what we recommend is once you register, put on a threshold of 1 gallon per hour for 24 hours because, like I always explain, why would you be using water at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m.? Now, if you have a swamp cooler and that is running at night, that probably would do it, but it would send you an email or a text. You decide when you register and let you know about that abnormal consumption. So is this working? Yeah. As people were entering, we were mentioning Utility Hawk and our regulars here, Manny and, I'm sorry, I've forgotten your name, Annette. And he was explaining about Utility Hawk, a really positive thing that he has been able to partake of since he's been a customer registered.
Yes, it's I've been able to use 3 times. First time I was out of town, and the other 2 times I was at home, and I was notified, and it saved me some money, but I still had to pay some money, but it saved me a lot more money.
Thank you, Manny, and that's the beauty of it. Like, it's very innocuous, and then when you need it, it's there for you to let you know what's going on that, left on the water after I was washing the dog, and I got an alert. So lcutilityhawk.com is where you're going to register. Please do. We're like a record holder. Like it's a service that's across the nation, but I think we're one of the highest as far as registered users. Like 44% of our water customers are registered for Utility Hawk. And of course you can do it for gas too. But you know, gas is a little bit not as easy to control. You need a certain amount of gas to heat your water and your stovetop, right? So anyhow, but it does monitor that for you also. We are in warm season watering restrictions. We do have our awesome pamphlet in Spanish and English that tells you about that. And as I always like to say, what that means is only water before 10 a.m. Even earlier would be better, right? So the sun doesn't suck it up till your roots get a good drink. And after 6 p.m. that the sun's gone down. No watering on Mondays. There's never any watering on Mondays, whether it's warm season or cool season, but just to be aware of that evaporation. And even addresses. This is so scintillating, I know. Even addresses like 2, 4, 6, right? Tuesdays, that's how we remember it, right? Even addresses you can water on Tuesdays, Thursdays, Saturdays. Odd is Wednesdays, Fridays, Sundays, no watering on Mondays, as I mentioned earlier. Also, we have a water waste hotline. And I've mentioned this before. I don't know if you want to take a photo, but it's really easy to remember, 528-4444. And what we're asking is that you call that number, and if you can just give us the location, the time, location as in the address, and when you witnessed it, like time of day, the date. And our awesome monitor, Ms. Leslie Besner over here, she's keeping track of our online viewers. She'll just go in and educate them about what, you know, they should be doing if they're having water running off the property, if they're watering so much the water's ponding on their property, if they're washing their car and they don't have a shut off on it, not to use water to clean off your sidewalk. A broom is fine. There's just different things that we can do to avoid wasting water. Excuse me. And another item we have our Water Saver program. It's there on the table. We would love to know about anybody who is taking measures to save water. And I had mentioned this before, but we had Mr. Robert who installed a 4-gallon water heater underneath his kitchen sink so he doesn't have to waste water heating up his water when he's washing dishes. We have Ellie and Blaine, and they capture all the water at their kitchen and bath sinks when their water's heating, and then use that to water their plants. And they take 3-minute showers. So let's shorten our showers, do those things, and if you are doing those things, let us know about it. We'd give you a big award of a swag bag of water conservation and give you a shout out on our social media. We can certainly put a stadium cushion in there, Dr. Hirama. Thank you. Also one last plea. If you have a few hours, if you'd like to work with, me, if you'd like to work for water conservation, that's it, the bottom line. It's a great cause. We really could use some volunteers. We normally have Miss Avery here. She had something else going on. We have Miss Gloria. She's helping us. We just really appreciate help. It's not a huge commitment, but we do appreciate the help. And you get to interact with the public and, promote a good cause, which is water conservation. And please silence your cell phones if you haven't already. And if it's all right, I'd like you to please save your questions till the end, and I will bring you the microphone so the people at home can hear you. How many people do we have viewing at home, Leslie? Do you know? Okay, no biggie, so the people at home can hear it. All right, for the moment you've been waiting for. Oh yeah, do you want to get that back to ground zero?
Oh, no.
Oh, you're doing it reverse.
Backwards, yep.
Okay, it's so funny because I gave Dr. Hirama a hard time because he's got all this great information and then the different varieties of fruit trees that people wanted to know about. He had to ram through that really quick. So he's actually reversing his presentation tonight. So we make sure we get that covered. Thank you, Dr. Hirama. You're so flexible. Love it. Yeah. All right, so here we go. Here's his big introduction. If you're like me, your mouth starts watering when you hear the word pecan. Is your mouth watering? Love pecans. New Mexico pecans, oh man. Our presenter this evening, Dr. Richard Hirama, is dedicated to researching the best practices of producing those tasty morsels, especially here in the Southwest. Growers in Las Cruces face unique challenges with soil conditions and getting pecans the micronutrients they need. I always like to give Las Cruces pecans when I'm, traveling, and my friends just like, oh man, thanks for the pecans. Dr. Hirama grew up in San Joaquin, California, a major food production area known for their wine grapes and almonds. After receiving his PhD in plant biology / pomology, which is fruit trees, right? Growing fruit trees. That's lungs. Pomology. From UC Davis, where his research was working with almonds. Did I say that right? Almonds, right? But there they say almonds. He moved to Las Cruces and ever since has been living his dream. He is a professor and professor at NMSU and extension pecan specialist for New Mexico State University. This evening, he's sharing his pomology, the science of growing fruit knowledge with us. Yay, Dr. Hirama. Thank you so much. Can we give a big round of applause to Dr. Hirama, please?
All right.
You want to come back here?
No, I'm going to be up here. Yeah.
Do you mind just coming back here for a little
Once
bit
in a while,
so people
I'll
get to see you?
yeah, here. I'll have to push this way. All right. So how many people were there online? Seven. Oh, I thought you said 70. Okay, I got it. All right. Hi, guys. All right. So I'm going to come up here, and our 7 friends that are online, well, maybe they'll feel like coming in person next time, or but I'll try to say hi once in a while to them. I think they'll still get the gist if they can't see me. All right. So we're going to. I gave this same presentation last year. So if you were here last year, you're going to hear the same presentation, sort of, except, so what happens is I talk too much, and I don't get to the end of the presentations. And so we missed the whole part about tree nuts, where I had to go really fast. And so I'm starting in the second part of the presentation. We're going to start with the tree nuts, and if we run out of time, we're not going to get to the apples and the peaches and stuff like that. Well, we'll see. We will see. We will see. There's so much good stuff to talk about. Maybe we should start alternating every other year, something like that. All right. So we talked about pomology. Before we go any further, so I grew up in the San Joaquin Valley, and there's all kinds of fruit trees over there. And that's how I got interested in this stuff, in orchard production. Okay, not just commercial. I like the backyard orchards too. It's a fascinating subject. You mentioned, mouth-watering, pecans. That's the thing that I love. One of the things I love about fruit trees is most of them produce something that's really, really delicious. There's probably a few things that are not that good, but there are some really good, some of the best foods that exist come from fruit trees. Okay, that's one of the reasons I like this. And this stuff makes people happy. All right? But it's more than that. These trees are beautiful. A lot of them make gorgeous flowers, right? So there's the aesthetics, the visuals as well that I think are just phenomenal with these plants. And then on top of that, the fruit itself, many of these fruits are gorgeous, right? Let's just think about a pomegranate. So some of you have pomegranate trees in your yards. What a phenomenal plant that is. It makes that brightly colored orange flower, followed by that gorgeous fruit. I mean, the shape of that fruit, the color of it, the inside of the fruit, and then those green leaves. It is a gorgeous plant, right? And that's true for a lot of the fruit. Some of the most beautiful foods that we eat are from fruit trees. Okay, so that's another thing and I could go on and on and on. But you know what's also fascinating is a lot of the biology of this. So how does pollination happen? A lot of times it involves an insect of various sorts. We're going to talk about some of that stuff. We're going to talk about the different pollination patterns. A lot of what I talk about, it's not going to be immediately practical. It's just going to be interesting, okay? Now, I know not everybody is interested in interesting stuff, but you'll just bear through, and we'll get some practical stuff out of the way too, right? If that's really all you're interested in here, sorry, we're going to have some stuff that's just interesting. Hopefully, we'll see some beautiful pictures of fruit, stuff you've seen before probably, but and we'll talk about it. It can be a little bit conversational, but realize that if it gets too conversational, we're not going to get to the end of the presentation. Okay, it's just how it works. But I kind of like it actually if there's a little bit of interaction. So is that all right? Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. We're going to start with the nut crops. Now, I said I've been talking about fruit this whole time. I studied pomology for my PhD work, right? And pomology is the study of fruit crops. That was what was just mentioned. Particularly the perennial fruit crops. That includes the nut crops. Nuts are fruit, okay? So let's get that out of the way. So definitions. A lot of times people like to argue about words and stuff. Well, a nut is a fruit. Now, what makes a nut different from, at least in the culinary sense, from the other fruit is we eat the seed, okay? And the seed is actually the embryo of the plant. Did you all know that? Yeah, it's the embryo, right? So that is what's different. Now, in the case of an apple, right? So an apple's a fruit, right? You're eating the actual technical botanical fruit part of that fruit, but you're discarding the embryos, the seeds, right? Those don't taste good, plus they can make you a little sick too, a little sick to your stomach. They have some toxin in an apple, right? So we throw that part away, right? In the case of a peach, same thing. We throw the seed and actually throw a little bit of the fruit away too. That shell is part fruit, botanically, okay? But that seed on the inside of that shell, we're chucking it. It's not good. Case of an almond, we're throwing away the fruit part of it and we're eating the seed. But from a horticultural perspective, we're dealing with a fruit crop. We're trying to produce fruit that has the seed on the inside of it. We're eating the seed. Okay, so let's look at the botanical definition of a nut. It's a dry, indehiscent, that means it doesn't split open, okay? Hard one-seeded, simple fruit. Okay, so there's a lot there. If you've ever taken a botany class or maybe a horticulture class, you might recognize some of those words. But that's what that means, and we'll talk about how that fits. Now, the definition of a nut culinarily is actually a little bit different, and in context we can use that word different ways, right? And you'll see why that's important here in a second. But in the case of the culinary definition, we can change it up. So it's any large edible seed surrounded by a shell. Large is a little bit relative, but that's all right. Okay, so let's start with peanuts. Peanuts are not botanical nuts. Now, they don't grow on a tree either, so they don't really fit with this whole study of tree fruit and tree nuts. They don't grow on a tree. Have you ever seen a peanut plant? They are so cool. They have this, so that the stem that makes the flowers, it buries itself. It goes under the ground, and the flowers are produced, and the fruit are produced underground. It is amazing. It's really a very interesting plant. Okay, so it actually plants the seed. The plant plants the seed. I don't actually know of another plant that does that. Really cool. Okay, I'm sure there's other ones. But they are not botanically nuts, right? For one thing, they're not one-seeded. The fruit isn't one-seeded, and it splits open, right? So it's dehiscent. It's actually a legume, right? That's the name of that kind of fruit. So a peanut fruit, that thing when you buy the big bag with the shell still on it, those are peanut fruits, okay? And those are legumes. That's the kind of fruit that it is. Almonds and pistachios, they are not botanically nuts, okay? But they are just like a peanut, they are culinarily nuts. It's okay to call an almond a nut. And a lot of people argue about this kind of stuff. Is a tomato a vegetable or is it a fruit? Well, okay. Culinarily, it's probably more of a vegetable, but botanically, it's a fruit. Same kind of argument, right? People have this sort of argument over nuts as well. Now, pecans, hickories, and walnuts, you'll find that scientists actually argue about whether these are actually botanically true nuts. I'm on the team that says, yes, these are botanically true nuts. Now, they're weird ones, though, because they have that shuck on the outside of them, okay? So in the case of the pecans and hickories and walnuts, there's that green part on the outside of a walnut or a pecan fruit that you've seen, and that splits open and turns black at the end of the season, and then you have the shell underneath that, right? So that soft part doesn't fit with that dry indehiscent part, right? And so that it doesn't really, turns out that on the outside isn't technically derived from the ovary, right? And for fruit to be fruit, it has to derive from the ovary of the flower, and it doesn't. And there's a scientist from University of California. He's passed away now. Vito Polito is his name. Coolest name ever. He looked at how the vasculature of the different tissues on a pecan and walnut fruit connect, and he was able to determine that those are actually not part of the ovary originally. They're like little leaves called bracts that wrap around it. And so from that, that makes the fruit tissue of a pecan the shell, and only the shell. Okay, it's technically a nut. Chestnuts, hazelnuts, acorns. Those are true nuts from a botanical perspective, but you know what? You can call a peanut a nut because of the culinary definition. It's okay. All right? That's where we're at on that. Is this going to work? I got to turn it. Maybe it's not going to work. Maybe it'll work now. Yeah, it's working now.
Okay.
Yep. Cool. All right. So let's talk about the one that we grow around here, a lot of around here, first. So let's talk about this plant, the pecan. All right. This almost is what it looks like this time of year, up at the top there with those long flowers there. Okay, so the pecan that's the scientific name. Okay, so all of these, I'm gonna talk just briefly about the scientific name. You know what? Is that useful? Well, maybe. It might help you understand how things are related to each other. I'm also going to talk about the stuff that they are related to, and I think it's interesting from a plant science and from a horticulture perspective. pecan is Carya illinoinensis. That genus name, that's the first name, the one that's capitalized. Carya is the genus of the hickories. Okay, so pecan is a hickory. A lot of people are surprised by that. It is just one kind of hickory. There's the shagbark hickory and the shellbark hickory and the bitternut hickory and the Chinese hickory, and there's a lot of different kinds of hickories, okay? Pecan's just one of them. It's the only one out of all those hickories that doesn't have the name hickory in its name, but it's a hickory. It's in that genus hickory. Illinoinensis. Okay, well, so does that mean it comes from Illinois? What do y'all think? Is that where pecans come from? No, well, I mean, there are actually some native pecans to Illinois. That's not where that name comes from, though. So the first English name for pecans was Illinois nut. Okay, so pecans are native to North America. Unlike most of the other fruit crops, nut crops that we're going to talk about today, this one actually comes from North America. It comes from this big area from about Texas up through Oklahoma. It goes up into Indiana, Illinois, part of Iowa. That's the native range where you find wild forests of pecans. And in part of that area, there are groups of Native American tribes called the Illinois bands. And those tribes, which include the Algonquin, they traded with English-speaking settlers, colonists on the east coast of North America. Okay? And they were these Illinois Indians. That was the term they used. And that's why they call it the Illinois nut. Okay? And folks like Thomas Jefferson and George Washington, they actually thought this was an interesting plant. It's one they tried to grow themselves. And so even if you go to Monticello today, some of Thomas Jefferson's pecan trees are still standing there. So he grew some seeds. He grew some pecan trees. Washington also had some pecan trees at Mount Vernon, and I visited Mount Vernon. I don't think I saw any of those still standing, but the ones at Monticello are still there. Illinois nut. That's why it's called that. But we don't call them that though. We call them pecan. Nobody even knows what an Illinois nut is nowadays, right? Unless you have the scientific name in front of you, you don't use that. That name is an Algonquin word. So they had some, I don't know what it sounded like when they said the word, and I'm actually not sure if Algonquin is still a language that's used. So I'm not sure if we can ever find that out. I don't know. That'd be good to look up. Maybe somebody can go on Wikipedia and find that out for me. But that was where that word that we use today came from. But it came to us via the French. Okay, so there were French settlers in the area of Louisiana and across much of that southern area of the United States. They encountered these Native American tribes who were eating this nut. They thought it was a walnut. Okay, they thought it was a kind of a walnut, and they knew that was the name for that. And it meant, in the Algonquin language, it meant a nut that's so hard you need a stone to crack the shell. Okay, that's what it meant. They probably used that same name for a lot of different kinds of tree nuts. But the word pecan ended up by the French getting assigned specifically to the thing we call pecan today. The pecan industry really started because the French started trading through the port of New Orleans. They started trading pecans with Europe, with other parts of North America as well. And so that's really how the industry kind of got its start in a more global trade sort of a way. All right, so another point up here is that, so I mentioned that the French, they thought that this was a kind of a walnut. There's actually a really kind of a cool quote that it comes from a French settler in Louisiana. His name was Jean. I think most of these guys' name was probably Jean. But anyway, he said that the natives have 3 different kinds of walnuts that they eat, and one of them is as big as their fist. Okay, what do you suppose that might have been? Any idea? Say, it wasn't cacao. So this would have been in Louisiana, right? So I don't think they would have seen cacao. That would have been further south, probably Central America, part of Mexico. And cacao's bigger than a fist too. Yeah. So has anybody ever seen a black walnut? Eastern black walnut? Not the ones that we have here in Arizona and New Mexico. You've seen those, right? Those fruit are as big as a fist. They are huge. I think that's what it was, probably. But he said there's another one, and this is the best one, he said, is the one that's the size of your thumb. I'm going to go ahead and guess that was a pecan. So, yeah. And you know what? Those Frenchmen were not so far off. They thought they were walnuts. They're not walnuts, but they're in the family of the walnuts. And I think anybody who's looked at a pecan tree or looked at a walnut tree, looked at the pecan nut, you might see the resemblance. They're different, but just like every family, we don't all look exactly the same in the family, right? So it's a cousin to the walnuts. We'll talk more about walnuts in a moment, but a lot about the pecan biology is very similar to walnut biology. Okay, and that's kind of an interesting. That's helpful actually as we're growing these trees to know a little bit about what they're related to, what else grows like them. Now the difference between a walnut and a pecan. What is the difference? So there's a few things that we could say. So some of it's kind of technical. If you look on the inside of the stems, there's actually some differences in the anatomy of a walnut stem versus a pecan stem. But there's an easy one that you can look at. You can look at a walnut tree that has fruit on it, and a pecan tree or a hickory tree that has fruit on it, and you could say, okay, so that's a hickory. You by just looking at the fruit, and you can do the same thing for a walnut. You can say that's a walnut, not a hickory. And the way you can do it is if you look at this. Does this work on here? It does. So if you look at these lines, these sutures. I know our folks online, they can't see me pointing a laser at this, but those sutures that are on the shuck of the pecan, those are absent. All the hickories have those sutures, and they split in a straight line. A walnut, no sutures, and it's a jagged mess when those shucks start splitting. Okay, that's a very easy way to tell the difference if you're looking at a walnut or a hickory, including the pecan. One thing that's common to hickory, pecan, and walnut is that the male and the female flowers are on the same tree. Okay, so some kinds of trees, we'll talk about pistachio pretty soon, there's male trees and there's female trees, and you have to plant both if you're going to get pollination. Okay, other plants, like the almond or the apple, we'll talk about both of those hopefully, the flowers have the male and female flower parts all in a single flower. Okay, so a lot of our fruit trees are like that. That's not how it is in pecan. Pecan, every tree has two kinds of flowers. It has a male flower and a female flower. Okay, the male flowers are very tiny, but they're formed on these long stems, pendulous stems. There's little tiny flowers along those stems, and those are the flowers that produce the pollen that makes you sneeze and makes your eyes itch. Those are the ones that make people hate pecan trees for about a week or two. All right? Those are the, who knows the name of those kind of, that sort of a inflorescence, right? So inflorescence is a group of flowers, a clump of flowers. What do you call that sort of a inflorescence? Oh, you don't know? Some people might call those, they call those tassels. You might call those, so there's several different names for those sorts of things. And this is a spike right here. It's a kind of a spike. This is the female flowers. Okay, and you can see right there. Those are the flowers. The actual so the pollen has to land on that stigmatic surface. It's sticky. Okay, and when the flower is receptive, then the pollen tube will germinate, or the pollen grain will germinate, and the tube will fertilize the flower, and that's where the embryo, which is the pecan, then would form. All right, so the next thing we'll talk real briefly about. Well, I should mention another thing with the flowers. What does this mean about pecans. Can you plant just a single pecan tree and expect to get pecans? Yeah. So what if you're in the middle of nowhere and there's not another pecan tree anywhere else? Can you still do that? Yeah. You can. That's exactly right. So you can plant a single pecan tree. Now, here's a little bit of a glitch in that, like a lot of plants, this plant has a built-in outcrossing mechanism. It's a biological, a physiological system that sort of prevents a lot of self-pollination. Pecan doesn't do a very good job of it, and so you can plant a single pecan tree and still get pollination, still get fertilization, and still get pecans. But if you really want to get a lot of pecans, then you have to plant more than one, and that's because every pecan variety has either the male flowers come out a little bit earlier than the female flowers in the spring, or vice versa. We have type 1 and type 2 varieties, and with these type 1 and type 2 varieties, the type 1s have the male flowers coming out first, and then the female flowers later. So the most common variety that we have here in Las Cruces is a variety called Western. Western is a type 1 variety. The male flowers first, then female flowers, but there's a little bit of overlap. The later pollen shed and the earliest of the female flowers, they overlap. But if you really want to do it well, you would plant a type 2 variety like Wichita. Wichita is the second most common variety that you'll find in this area. It's a type 2 variety where the female flowers are receptive first, and then the pollen is shed later. And so you can see why planting both of those will increase the pollination. So, now, do you need to do that if you have a yard tree? I wouldn't. Most of us, get way more pecans than you actually need for your backyard tree. There are some pests for pecans, but not a lot. If you go to places like Georgia, or if you go to places like Texas where pecans are native, there's a lot more insect pests than we have here. And I've got pictures of a few of these. So if you have a pecan tree, this year, kind of look around and see what sort of things you're seeing. I hope you don't see this one, because we're not supposed to have that one close to Las Cruces. We do have it in other parts of New Mexico. It's the pecan weevil. But if you do see this guy right here, a grub on the inside, or if you see a little hole that looks like a BB hole coming out of the shell, go ahead and give a call over to the county extension office. Okay, so Jeff Anderson over at the county extension office, he'll work with me. He'll work with the New Mexico Department of Ag, because that's a really important pest that we don't want to have here. It has showed up before in this part of New Mexico, and normally what happens is the NMDA they go all out and work to eradicate it. It's been eradicated in several places in New Mexico. Why would they go through the trouble of eradicating it? Well, it's not only for the sake of making life easier for farmers. It's also because we really don't want to have to spray so many pesticides. And if this pest were to show up, that would make it needful to apply a lot more pesticides. A couple other things you might see. There's one up here closer to the top. A lot of folks will see this on their pecan trees toward the end of the season. They'll see yellow blotches all over the leaves of their trees. And that's caused by an aphid that when it feeds, it injects a toxin into the leaf tissue, and it causes those leaves to start going through their fall-time senescence. The tissue right around those leaves starts turning yellow like it should do in the fall. It's really kind of a cool little trick that this insect has, because in so doing, it's causing all of the proteins and stuff that are in those leaves to get freed up, so that insect is getting more nutrition as a result of that. It's really kind of an interesting little trick. But that's bad for a pecan tree. It's bad for pecan farmers. If you have a backyard tree, it might be unpleasant because a lot of those leaves fall off of the tree. But it's probably not going to kill your tree. I don't think you need to worry about it that much. You probably have noticed that some aphids produce tons of honeydew. Have you ever seen that? You know what honeydew is? What's honeydew? Yeah, it's sticky stuff that you get all over the leaves, get all over the ground. If you park your car under it, you can't even see out the windshield sometimes if it gets bad. Yeah, so honeydew is, it's aphid poop. That's what it is. So it's aphids, these yellow aphids, they feed on that sap, and it's full of sugar. There's plenty of sugar in there, way more sugar than the insect needs, but there's not that much protein in there. And so it actually poops all the excess sugar out, and that's what ends up getting all over the place. So if you ever wonder what that is, that's what that is. That's what's getting all over your picnic table or your sidewalk, whatever's under your pecan trees. It's one of the reasons why I really don't want a pecan tree parked too close to my house. It's a little bit of a mess, the honeydew in particular. In a commercial setting, there's ways to manage that. In a backyard, that's really kind of hard to do. There's another one. It's called and this is kind of a little moth and a caterpillar, right? So caterpillars and moths, they go together, right? So this pecan nut case bearer, that's a little worm that'll eat an immature pecan and cause it to fall from the tree. So that's a problem that you might see in your pecan trees too, if you have one. Again, I don't really think that it's necessary for a backyard homeowner to get too worked up about it, because it's really hard to spray a great big pecan tree. There are some good, safe chemicals to use, some that are allowable in organic farming even. There are some great ways to do this. It's just really hard for a backyard farmer to spray all the way to the top of his tree, right? These are such big trees, and that's really difficult. I don't want you to get, even if it's one of these, safer type materials, you still have to make sure you don't get it all over yourself. You don't get it all over your neighbor, your neighbor's kids, whatever. You don't want to get these sprays all over things. You need to follow those labels, be very careful, and I think that's difficult to do when you don't have all the right equipment. So, I think in general we don't have to worry too much about controlling the insect pests in backyard trees. There are some diseases too, and again, just like I said earlier. We have fewer diseases and less disease pressure in pecan trees that are grown here in the Southwest than in other parts of the country. That's mostly due to our really dry climate. And you might not be surprised by this, I don't know. One of the reasons why it's so popular to grow pecans in New Mexico is because we don't really struggle with the disease problems. In some places where it's very humid, they have to spray fungicides. And sometimes they spray lots of fungicides in order to prevent fungal diseases from occurring in their orchards. Here in New Mexico, we don't do that. We don't have to spray fungicides, okay? Because the climate is dry. Okay, but we do have a few diseases that occur. One is cotton root rot, and that's a disease that'll cause a tree its root system gets rotten, and the fungus will eat those roots. It'll cause the tree to die really quickly in the summertime when it gets hot. Okay, it's a very common disease in agricultural fields. Sometimes in your backyard, if you're kind of unlucky, you might have it in your soil there. And that makes it really hard to garden. Makes it really hard to grow a pecan tree or a lot of our fruit trees, because it'll kill most kinds of fruit trees. That cotton root rot fungus will. There are some nematode issues as well as some bacterial diseases. This one's called bacterial leaf scorch. It's caused by a bacteria called Xylella fastidiosa. And Xylella fastidiosa, it lives inside the water-conducting veins of the stems, and it makes it hard for that plant to get water. And so then you start ending up with that sort of a disease. It's the same kind of bacteria that causes the disease called Pierce's disease. That was it. Oh, it's probably been 20 years ago now, but there was an outbreak of Pierce's disease in grapes in Southern California, near Temecula, California. There's the glassy winged sharpshooter insect that moved the bacteria from plant to plant, and then there was a lot of plants died as a result of this Pierce's disease in Southern California. It also more recently made the news in the olive orchards of Italy, where Xylella fastidiosa was causing olive tree scorch and killing lots of even very old olive orchards in Italy. A couple of the other things that you really need to think about when you are growing pecan trees in your backyard here in New Mexico is that because we live in an arid climate, our soils are chock full of lime. Okay, it's kind of a chalky substance, and it's calcium carbonate or bicarbonate. That causes the pH of the soil to typically be above 7, right? So above 7 means alkaline, below 7 means acidic, 7 is neutral, right? Here in this area, most of our soils are going to be somewhere in the pH range of 7.2 to well above 8 sometimes even like 8.5. That doesn't sound that exciting, except for the fact that a lot of nutrients the availability of the nutrient is dependent on the pH of the soil. Okay, so that's one of the reasons why gardeners and farmers care about the pH of their soil, is because certain nutrients become less available as the soil becomes alkaline. And one of the ones that is famous for that is zinc. Nickel's kind of another one, but zinc is probably the most common deficiency that you'll see in an orchard of pecans around here. So if you have a pecan tree in your backyard here, you may start seeing some kind of brownish spots and a little bit yellowing, a wrinkly leaf margin, so the edge of the leaflet gets wrinkly, and sometimes they're very thin and strap-like. This is a picture of a canopy that has some zinc deficiency in it, and that's normally not fixed by applying fertilizers to the ground like we often do with nutrient issues in other kinds of nutrient issues. In this case, if we put zinc on the ground, it might not be available because remember, we have all that lime and the alkaline pH, right? And so that creates an issue, okay? And so one of the approaches to deal with that is to spray zinc onto the leaves. So it turns out that you can actually fix this problem by spraying it onto the leaves. But that's a little bit difficult. Remember what I just said about the pesticides? It's kind of true for the zinc too, although I'm a little less worried about people getting exposure to zinc than I would be for the pesticides. It's still maybe not a good idea to try to spray the whole tree if you don't have the right equipment. So there are some ways to apply these nutrients, these micronutrients like zinc, to the soil, and that is to use a chelated fertilizer rather than the much cheaper zinc sulfate, which is typically used. So the naturally mined zinc is zinc sulfate, but there are chelated fertilizers like zinc EDTA. Okay, these are a little bit more available in our alkaline pH soils than they would be if they weren't chelated. So that zinc sulfate, it will get bound up immediately. Chelated zincs like zinc EDTA could be more available for the tree to get into it. We've done a lot of research on this particular topic in Arizona as well as New Mexico, and it does work. Another issue that we face here in the more arid or semi-arid regions is salinity and sodicity. Those sound kind of like the same thing, but they're not quite exactly the same thing. Salinity is really just the general accumulation of salts in a soil, or it could just be a high level of salts in the irrigation water that we might use. So all of our irrigation water has a little bit of salt. Some of it might be very salty, and every time we irrigate, we're putting some salt on that soil. So even if it's a low amount of salt, over time, if we're not careful, if we're not actually actively managing the leaching of that salt that we're applying, we might end up with a soil that becomes more or less useless for agriculture because those salt levels get too high for the plant. As As those salt levels get too high for the plant, what do you suppose happens? Why is that bad for the plant? Any idea? Right. So did you all hear that? It makes it harder for that plant to absorb water, right? So the way that water moves into a plant is that plant has a water potential. So physically, it has a water potential that is lower than the soil around it. Okay, that means water always flows down a water potential gradient. Now, it's not, when I say down, sometimes that means actually in the direction of up. But if you ever take you've probably seen examples of osmotic, where they'll demonstrate an osmotic movement of water into something. I'm trying to think of an example to kind of illustrate this. Well, one way is just a straw, right? So if you take a straw and you apply a negative pressure by sucking on that straw, you have reduced the water potential of that space in the straw, and water moves from that cup up into the straw. So actually, it is moving down a water potential gradient because you've reduced it with that suction, but it actually is physically moving upward. Same sort of thing is happening in a plant. Salts also affect the water potential. More salt means a lower water potential. And so now it makes it a little bit harder for that water to get into the plant. It has to apply more suction in order to get water to move in. Okay? That's one of the reasons why salinity is bad. Some of these salts actually can get to toxic levels. Chloride, for example, sometimes can get to toxic levels in a pecan tree. So certain salts are poisonous to the plant as well if they get too high. So those are the reasons. Now, that's salinity. Salinity is the amount of salt. Sodicity is a particular kind of ion, the sodium ion. Okay? Sodium does some really unusual things in soils. One of the things it does is when the sodium level gets too high, and if there's a lot of clay in that soil, it can turn a soil into a kind of a cement or a concrete, and it makes it hard for water to move in. Right? So if you're trying to do good irrigation, you need that water to move into the soil where the roots are, and sometimes sodium can create problems for that to happen. Okay? So sodicity is a sodic soil is one that has high sodium level, especially compared to calcium and magnesium, whereas a saline soil just has a high general salt load. It has all the salts that are too high. It could be one particular salt, but it doesn't have to be one particular salt in the case of salinity. All right, let's talk a little bit about irrigation. So some of what I'm going to be talking about is probably more applicable to commercial pecan production, but the same rules can apply in a backyard as well. I will say, first of all, pecan trees in this area do need irrigation. You can't grow pecan trees without irrigation in New Mexico. Okay, so some people would say, well, does that mean this isn't a plant that we should grow here? That's something you'll have to decide for yourself. I'd say most of the plants that we grow here require irrigation. So yeah, I mean, you can decide for yourself what your values are on that sort of thing. I will say though, pecan is very well adapted to this environment. It does have some high water requirements. That's a fact of the matter. Traditionally, this on the right, that's how pecans were irrigated in New Mexico, is through flood irrigation. Is that a bad thing? I will say that it's not as simple. It's not super simple to answer that question. Is flood irrigation bad? I would argue that flood irrigation, from one perspective, is actually necessary for the water cycle that we have in New Mexico. However, let's think about one of the issues with it. One of the issues with it is that if the water that is being applied is groundwater, if the irrigation water that is being applied is groundwater, this is not the most efficient way to apply groundwater. Okay, so we have currently a couple different projects. One in particular is it's a USDA-funded project through the University of California, Merced, where we've had a couple of graduate students really study the efficiencies of different irrigation systems. And from what we can see from their data is that there actually is a necessary place for flood irrigation. But that is particularly when surface water is being applied. When surface water is being applied, this is one of the best ways for us to recharge aquifers. Okay, so surface water means water from Elephant Butte Irrigation District. Based on what we can see, Jorge Preciado in particular, he was one of the graduate students who was working on this. It's very clear that flood irrigation, again, that it can contribute significantly to aquifer recharge. But if groundwater is being applied, in that case it doesn't really apply. Okay, because if you're extracting the water from the aquifer, then for it to just recharge, that's not recharge. That's just return flow is the name of that. Anyway, the bottom line is from the research of that student and others, it seems that flood irrigation does play a vital role in some cases, and used in certain ways. So it's really not quite as clear cut as this is a bad way to do it versus there's a good way, drip irrigation. Now let's talk about sprinkler irrigation. Sprinklers are those are the emitters that water large areas. They still supply a very large quantity of water, and they throw the droplets through the air. In some ways, sprinkler irrigation is better than flood irrigation. One of the ways that sprinkler irrigation is an improvement over flood irrigation is that the uniformity of distribution is improved. With flood irrigation, a head of water moves across a field, okay? And the part of the field nearest to the valves or to the ditch receives more water every time than the part of the field at the end of the irrigation run. That's just inherent to this system, okay? That's an inefficiency. That lack of distribution uniformity is an inefficiency. There's other reasons why the distribution uniformity is not very good with flood irrigation compared to sprinkler irrigation. And that is that soils are not uniform. You might have some clay in one area, you might have some sand in another area, and that means the water holding capacity varies across a field. It's one reason why sprinklers might be better than flood irrigation. But I mentioned that droplet is flying through the air and it's evaporating the whole way. Okay, so evaporative losses from a sprinkler system might actually be higher than they are for flood irrigation. A lot of folks don't know that. Most of the irrigation cycle in flood irrigation, there's a dry orchard floor and there's very little evaporation happening. Okay? And so you can see where in a flood irrigation setting, you might not have that situation. Micro sprinklers are low volume application of water. And so the micro sprinklers and drip irrigation have very low evaporation and they have excellent uniformity. So they have the advantages of sprinkler irrigation without the evaporation. And so that's really one of the places where you're seeing movement, you're seeing a push in that direction in the orchard industries. And we have research at New Mexico State University that's really helping to get this industry here locally and also backyard folks to get involved in adopting more efficient irrigation systems. All right, so that's pecans. Let's talk a little bit about a couple other tree nut crops. We'll go through these much faster. Walnuts are in that juglans family, which is in that same family as the pecans, the Juglandaceae. The English and Persian walnuts, these are not native plants. They come from Europe and from Asia originally. But there are some native species of walnuts. We have two species that are native to New Mexico. There's the Arizona black walnut, that's the one that you'll see that grows across the Gila. It's a walnut about that big, not very big. It's Arizona black walnut. Beautiful tree, very small nut. It is edible, but not really a great nut tree if you're trying to produce food. The one that's even worse is called the Texas little walnut, also native to New Mexico. They're really tiny. You'll see them in the Sacramentos, and you'll see them more in the eastern part of New Mexico, the southeastern part. Very, very tiny. They are edible, but they're very little. Almonds. So the walnuts, we can grow them in New Mexico, but not as well as we can pecans. Almonds. So almonds are in, this is the genus name, Prunus. That means they're related to prunes. They are actually. Prunus, that genus, is the stone fruit genus. So it includes peaches and plums and cherries and apricots. So all of those stone fruit species and almond are in that same genus. And have you ever seen an almond tree in bloom? Have you ever been to San Joaquin Valley and seen those orchards in bloom? Next February, try to make a point of getting there during the almond bloom. It is spectacular. It's just miles and miles and miles of white flowers. Really, really beautiful. That's kind of the area I grew up in. So my parents have an almond orchard, and it looks like that in February. It's in the rose family, which kind of makes sense that you'd have beautiful flowers from these trees. And you know that peach flowers and a lot of these other, apricot flowers, really quite beautiful flowers. The cherries, of course, they just got done blooming in Washington, D.C., right? And they're famous for beautiful flowers. Pollination of almonds is by bees, and there's an outcrossing mechanism that's a little different from what the walnuts and the pecans have. They're not pollinated by the wind like those other two. They're pollinated by bees, but you need to have two different varieties because of self-incompatibility. Most almond varieties are not compatible, right? If you took pollen from one and you put it onto the stigma of the other, of another flower on that same tree, you wouldn't get pollination. It wouldn't happen successfully because there's a genetic blocker there that stops it from happening, okay? And there's a lot of fruit trees that have this, but you need to have two varieties of almonds, generally speaking, in order to get good pollination. That's why so many bees have to go to California in the springtime. It's to make that happen. But guess what? That's changing. Okay, it is changing. A lot of new self-fertile, self-pollinating varieties of almonds have been developed. In fact, that's what's at my parents' orchard is a self-pollinating variety called Independence. It's a newer variety. These varieties it's really kind of fascinating to think about how these varieties were developed. The Prunus dulcis species has self-incompatible varieties, but it turns out that Prunus dulcis, almond, can hybridize with Prunus persica, which is peach. You can cross peach and almond. They're that closely related. And you don't end up with a mule, right? You don't end up with a mule. You know what I mean by that? So when you cross a donkey and a horse, right, two different species, you get a mule, and mules are not fertile. They can't produce offspring, okay? Did y'all know that? Yeah, okay. Well, when you cross an almond and a peach, you don't get a mule, you get a fertile plant. It actually will produce fertile flowers that can produce viable seed, and it can make a new plant, right? Well, for a plant breeder, that's important. Right? You can take self-fertile peaches, cross them with the self-incompatible almond, and you can get another plant that's something like a mix of an almond and a peach, and you can it'll be self-fertile. You could do some back crosses, right? So it takes several generations to kind of keep the self-fertility part and have an almond again. Okay, that's how they developed these varieties. So you had a question. Oh, what's the fruit like? Yeah. So what you get when you cross, yeah, it's very interesting. When you cross an almond and a peach, and let's say you do that 100 times and you plant them out, you're going to get some that look more like almonds, you're going to get some that look more like peaches, and you're going to get some that are kind of in the middle. Yeah. The main difference between an almond and a peach is that the fleshy part of the peach gets shrunk way down on an almond, and it turns leathery when the fruit's ripe. That's the main difference, and you're going to see. And also, the shells tend to be much thicker on peaches than they are on. All right. We have to get to the peaches next. All right. We have to talk about pistachios first. Come on. All right. Then we'll go to that. All right. So pistachios. All right. So pistachios are fabulous crop for New Mexico. What makes them really interesting is, and I mentioned this before, is they are dioecious. There's separate male and female trees. You need to buy one of each if you're going to get any pistachios. Okay. That being said, I think if you don't want fruit, plant the male tree. It is a really nice tree. Makes no fruit, but they're nice, big, and very, very good shade trees. So I'm a big fan of these as a backyard tree. Family Anacardiaceae is kind of an interesting family. It is related to, so in that family you find poison ivy and poison oak, poison sumac, so all kinds of interesting things. But there's also some other edible plants, like mangoes are in that, and also, what are those things? Cashews. Cashews are in that too. These are immature pistachio fruit. They look like little mangoes, don't they? You can see the family resemblance. Okay. These are wind pollinated also. One thing that makes them great for New Mexico is they're salinity tolerant, much more salinity tolerant than pecans are. They also use a little bit less water than a lot of our other fruit trees. This is a really nice backyard tree. So, all right, so that we will now go to the fruit. I have to, because I did it backwards, I have to do this a minute. All right. Now I need to, hopefully that didn't mess up anything for anybody. All right, we're going to talk about fruit. And I don't know how far we'll get in all this, but that's all right. I want to tell you, we do have, so check out this. I'm a co-author on this, but our other fruit specialist, Dr. Xingri Yao, is the lead author on this. But this is, I think, a really nice little summary of the different fruit varieties that we can grow here in New Mexico. And I think it's worth checking this out. That's a link for it right there. Let's talk about apples first. Shall we start with apples, or is there a particular fruit you want to go to?
Whatever you feel works best for our Las Cruces area.
All right.
Thanks.
Yeah. So take your phone. You have a phone? Like a smartphone? Just hold up the camera to that QR code up right there, and it'll take you right there. Quince, yeah, quince do grow around here. You know what? There's hardly a temperate fruit crop that we can't grow. So almost all this stuff just grows really well. Yeah. We'll talk about and get that publication, and you'll find a list of the different fruit that grow really well. Apples. So apples, they're also in the rose family, just like almonds. Malus is the name of the genus there. And these two, you have to plant more than one variety, just like almonds. You need to make sure that you get cross-pollination. I do think there are some self-fertile apples, but for the most part, you're going to do much better if you have two apple trees. One thing that's really cool about apples is there are dwarfing rootstocks. So unlike pecans, which are great big trees, apples, they're big trees, but you can graft a variety onto a dwarfing rootstock, and that tree will stay small for you. I really think that most of you will want to have a smaller apple tree, because a full-sized apple tree is really quite large, and you need ladders to pick the fruit. It's hard to It's hard to manage a much bigger tree. And so get dwarfing rootstocks. Semi-dwarf, something that's maybe going to end up being only 10 feet tall instead of 25 feet tall. It's going to be a lot better for most of you. Another thing to consider when you're picking an apple variety is the chill requirement. There are some apple varieties that require a lot of chilling, okay, in the wintertime. That means that they're really well developed for a place where the winter is long, okay, and where it's a little colder, okay. Others, there's a variety called Anna, for example, that was developed for Israel. It's an Israeli variety. They don't have a lot of cold weather in that part of the world, right? Mediterranean type climate, they don't. It's very warm. And Anna only requires something, a couple hundred hours of chilling. That means we probably got that already in January sometime. And if we have a nice, little week of warm weather, well, shoot, it might wake up in February, right? Bad news if you're an Anna tree here in New Mexico. Okay. Although I have heard that some people have done it. They've done it successfully, even these low chill varieties like Anna. A lot of different varieties, they all, a lot of these varieties are gonna do pretty well. But you need to kind of avoid the very high chill requirement apple varieties and the very low chill requirement. These are all gonna be okay, I think. Another thing to consider when you're planting apple trees is that some varieties, like Jonagold is a good example of that. I think McIntosh actually is to back up, that's a higher chill requirement apple, but some people do just fine with McIntosh most years. But I was mentioning Jonagold. Jonagold is a triploid variety. So triploid means that you have 3 copies of your genome instead of just 2. Okay? Most apple trees have 2. Most people have 2 copies, right? 2 copies of your gene. It means every chromosome you have 1 and then another one just like it. 1 and just another one like it, right? That's how most apples are too, but not Jonagold. It's got 3 copies. Okay? That means that Jonagold does not really function as a pollinizer for a diploid, a normal apple. So if you're going to plant Jonagold, you can expect, so the pollen flow the other direction works just fine. Diploid to triploid's fine, but not triploid to diploid. Okay, something to be aware of. These are kind of fun varieties. Some of these you can't really get very easily yet. I think you can get both of these now. This one you won't be able to get except at the store. Nowadays, when plant breeders develop a variety, they spend a lot of money on this and they need to get their money back somehow. Okay, and so a lot of these varieties, they develop what could be called a club variety, or there's some way that they protect their product for a number of years so that they can keep collecting royalties. Okay, that's how plant breeders work. That's how they make their money. Okay, Honeycrisp was developed by University of Minnesota, and of all places. That seems like Minnesota's not much of an apple producing state, but that's where this came from. And in order to protect that variety, they restricted the planting to just Minnesota and a little part of Wisconsin. Nowadays, Honeycrisp can be planted anywhere because the patent ran out. 20 years is all you get. Okay, and so now Honeycrisp, you can plant it in Washington State, you can plant it in New Mexico, anywhere. Okay. So there used to be restrictions there aren't now. In the case of Crips Pink or Pink Lady, the name of that variety depends on, have you ever noticed that both those varieties will show up in a grocery store, but the name of it is restricted depending on the size of the fruit. If the fruit is large, then you can call it Pink Lady in the store. Otherwise, it's going to be called Crips Pink. So if you want to plant a Pink Lady tree in your backyard, you're actually going to be getting a Crips Pink. Okay, so that's the name of the variety. You can only sell it as Pink Lady, though, if the fruit is larger than a certain size. Okay, it's a variety you can plant here if you like. Cosmic Crisp. This is actually the name of the variety, WA38. So the practice nowadays is to give the name of the variety, just it keeps the breeder name, right? So it was the 38th tree in the row or something like that, right? And so but nothing that's going to be attractive, right? That's the patented name. And then they have a trademark name that it's marketed under called Cosmic Crisp. Have you ever had that fruit? It is fabulous. It is incredible. I really like Honeycrisp. I like Cosmic Crisp even better. That's not one you're going to be able to buy and plant in your yard for some time because this patented WA38, they're only selling it for Washington State right now because it was developed in Washington State. Okay? They're limiting it just to the state of Washington for a time. And they collect royalties on every WA38 tree that they sell. Okay? And they want to keep it that way. But they're always going to retain control of that Cosmic Crisp name for marketing purposes. Someday people are going to be planting out WA38 and they won't be able to sell it as Cosmic Crisp because of the trademark. So they've really it's kind of a tricky way that they've managed to continue to remain profitable because you're not going to sell any apple called WA38, right, in the grocery store, right? But yeah, just for your backyard, you're not going to be able to get that for a while. That was just released, I think, maybe 5-7 years ago, something like that. So we have more than 10 years left, I think, before that one's going to be where the patent is going to run out. Let's talk about pruning your apple tree. Pear trees are the same. When we prune a pear tree or an apple tree, we're trying to get a central leader. Okay? And in order to get that central leader, you want to have kind of a pole going right up the middle of the tree. So if you don't start with this right at the beginning, from day one when you plant that tree, if you don't already have that in mind, you're going to end up with a big mess. And that's what most of us end up with, and it's fine. If you don't mind a big mess, that's fine. But if you want to have a central leader tree, then you need to actually conscientiously do that from the beginning. To do that, in year one, when you plant that tree, it's going to look like a little stick, okay? And if the nursery hasn't already given it a heading cut, meaning you cut off about, a third of the growth that's on there, then you need to do that. Feels like the wrong thing to do, but you need to do it. And the reason you want to do that is because that's what creates these upright growths. So if this is 1 year past between A and B, now it's dormant season, the dormant season after the year of planting, okay? Now you're going to try to continue that central leader. So you're going to select that shoot that's growing closest to the middle, okay? And so in this case, this is the one. And you want to give that one a heading cut again. And you want to remove any other shoots. That's what the dashed lines mean. Those are the ones that are removed. You remove all the ones that are competing with that central leader. Very important when this tree is small, okay? And leave a couple here that are your first scaffolds, and that'll thicken up that trunk, and you might get some fruit on that fairly soon. All right, another winter season has passed. And now, in that next winter season, you want to use some spreaders in order to get those limbs down to about a 45-degree angle or so. Wider angle is better, right? So most apple, and especially pear, have very narrow branch angles. And if we can push it down to 45, maybe even a little bit past 45, that's going to be a stronger branch. It's going to be better attached, and you're not going to get those bark inclusions in here that eventually cause those branches to break and fall off of the tree. Okay, and so in order to get those wider angles, you would definitely need to put some sort of a spreader in there. A lot of people use a little piece of wood, like just a small piece of wood with a notch cut in it, and they'll put that in there. Sometimes they'll use a little nail to hold it in place. That's okay to put a little nail into the branch. And you'll leave that there, and you'll continue basically that same system until you have about maybe in about 5 years, 4 years. That's when you'll have your whole tree kind of pruned into this sort of a central leader. With a central leader, you definitely don't want to have two trunks. You don't want to have two separate leaders, just one. The reason you don't want two, you don't want to have a Y-shaped tree is because, again, that's a weak connection, and a lot of times you'll lose a whole tree if you have a Y-shaped tree. Someday you'll have a lot of fruit on that tree, and on a windy day, the whole tree will fall in half. That's usually a disaster for that tree. So no Y-shaped trees. A common problem is bitter pit. So bitter pit, you've probably seen this in the fruit you bought in the store, and it's not much fun to have. It doesn't look like it, but it's actually a calcium deficiency, and it's related to water. We have lots of calcium in our soils already, but that calcium can't get into the fruit because the fruit doesn't transpire, not very much anyway. And so all the calcium is moving to the leaves, but it's not getting to the fruit. And so one of the ways to fix that is to spray a calcium spray onto the fruit. The same sort of thing can happen with your tomatoes. This is really kind of a serious issue in tomatoes and apple, both. This is one of the pests that affects apple, and that's called the codling moth. Have you ever eaten an apple and found a half worm in there? Yeah, that's the worst. This is the adult, but it's the worm on the inside that causes the problem. There are ways to deal with this. One of the most important ways for you to deal with this is sanitation in your orchard, right? So if you have an apple tree, at the end of the season, make sure there's no fruit with worms laying underneath your tree. Make sure all of that gets thrown into the garbage. Or if it goes into the compost, that it gets really hot. So do a good job of don't do composting the way I do, where I just keep throwing more on the pile and I never turn it, I never water it. If you do a good job of actually composting, like you have to water it, and you have to probably add a little bit of nitrogen fertilizer to it, and you have to turn it once in a while. I don't do that stuff. But if you do all that, it gets hot, and that will kill those worms. Some other approaches are bagging the fruit. It's a lot of work, but that's one way to do it. And that will keep the codling moth from getting in there. There are some insecticides that can be sprayed. In general, I don't recommend that for backyard scenarios. Fire blight is another issue. It's also related to water. Okay, so if you have sprinklers, make sure that those sprinklers are not getting up into the tree. They are a problem and that can really enhance the spread of this disease. There's a lot of water splashing all over the leaves. It's a bacterial disease, and it's spread by our good friend, the honeybee. We need honeybees for pollination, but honeybees go from tree to tree to tree, and they might go to a tree that's got bacteria on it, and then they go to your tree, and they land on the flower, and it'll infect that flower, and it'll get into the branch that way, okay? And then it might be spread throughout the orchard with pruning shears. It might be spread through that orchard with your sprinkler system or some rainfall. So yeah, if you do see this in your orchard, cut the branch out that's got it as quickly as possible. Use clean tools when you do this so that you don't spread it. There are some chemicals that can be used, but I don't recommend that for backyard producers. Pears. A lot of folks don't know this, but this is a great part of the world to grow Asian pears in particular. I have an Asian pear tree in my yard, and I love it. So how many of you have tried Asian pears? Yeah, most of you. Delicious fruit. They're hard to eat? Why is that? Oh, yeah. Oh, maybe it wasn't ripe yet. Yeah, I think that's probably what it was. Here's a secret. My Asian pear tree, I managed to, this is a secret, okay? I took a little branch from one of those trees at Fabian Garcia, and that the variety I have a tree that's got two varieties. It's got the variety that came with the tree from the nursery, and I grafted one of those Fabian Garcia varieties on there. I actually like the one from the Fabian Garcia farm better than the one that I ordered. It has a nice tart flavor, but yeah, I think what happened is you were eating it before it was completely ripe. Yeah, they're really quite nice if you're eating a fully ripened fruit. Yeah. All right, there was a question about quince. Who was it? Was it you asked the quince question? Can quince grow in New Mexico? This is a great place to grow quince. Quince is related to apples and pears, and that shouldn't surprise anybody because the fruit looks an awful lot like an apple or pear. The name of that fruit structure is a pome, which is related, of course, to pomology, the word pomology we talked about earlier. But a pome fruit is one that's got a core in it, okay? And quince are one of those. In that same rose family, which I think you'll find that most of those plants in that rose family have beautiful flowers. Quince has beautiful flowers, just like apples and pears do. The fruit are kind of pretty as well. In Spanish, membrillo is the name for quince, but it's also the name for some of the products that come from quince. So Mexican membrillo is sort of a buttery type, more of a buttery type pectin. It's basically the fruit's been cooked down and the flavors are there. It's really good. Spanish membrillo is a little bit firmer. It's more like cheese. So have you ever had the Spanish membrillo? It's really good with like real cheese. It's delicious. Check this out. There's a lot of pectin in this fruit. So this fruit's not great for just eating plain, I would say. Most people don't like to eat quince just plain. It's good cooked. It's nice to throw one into an apple pie. If you throw some pieces of quince, you get a lot of that pectin, thickens it up. It's really quite nice. That's all I've got to say about quince. Does anybody have any questions about quince? Uh-huh. Yep. Right, and so that will soften it up, and then you'll eat it just as a. There's a name for that process. I think it's called bledding. And so yeah, you have a frozen fruit that you take. Then it's a fresh fruit that's been frozen. You take it out, and you can actually eat it. Yeah, there's a few different fruit that benefit from that kind of a treatment, and quince is one of them. Yeah. Yep. All right, I have a peach tree in my yard. It's my favorite tree in my yard, I think. It makes so much fruit, and this is a wonderful place to grow peaches. Now, there's a little bit of a challenge, and one of the challenges for growing peaches is that they bloom, and there's still a chance for a freeze. So there's going to be some years where you're going to be risking it. I so far have not ever had an issue with my peach tree. It blooms just late enough, it's before the middle of March when it's blooming. But I think because I live in the city, it's kind of that heat from the city kind of keeps it. Even when it's freezing, I haven't lost a crop yet. Apricots are a little bit earlier, and most people complain that they never see an apricot on their apricot tree. I was going to say peach tree, but that apricot tree. You don't see apricots on your apricot tree because most of the time they get frozen out here in the area. Cherries are that way too, and actually almonds. Most of the time they'll get frozen out. Peaches, on the other hand, if you get especially one that's more of a later blooming one, great place to grow peaches. I think this is a picture from my tree. This is March 3. So this is a little bit of I said the first. What did I say before the middle of March? This is March 3rd of 2024. This year, I think it was a little bit later, which is interesting because we had 100-degree weather in March. Do you guys remember that? It's crazy. But this is my peach tree. With peaches, we typically try to prune to an open vase instead of that central leader. So we try to open up that center. So this is really an image showing, okay, so this is at planting, this is after that first year, and then this is what the pruning process looks like and so they're opening up that center, okay? So creating a tree that's maybe something like the shape of a wine glass, right? So that it's open in the middle, okay? Now, peaches do have one problem, and that is this guy. This guy, it's a funny looking little moth. It looks like more like a wasp, but it's a moth. And it is called the peach tree borer. I think the full name is lesser peach tree borer. Cynanthodon exitosa. And this little guy is going to be the reason why your peach tree probably is going to die. Okay, that's one of the reasons why you shouldn't really get too emotionally attached to your peach tree. In about 12, 15 years, it's going to die, and it'll be because of this insect. This insect, it has a big grub that gets into the roots and into the trunk, and you'll see big oozing, just oozing sap coming out, sticky sap. And that means your peach tree probably only has a year or 2 or maybe 3 left, okay? So now with peaches, what's fortunate about them is it only takes a couple years for it to get back into production. So my peach tree is about 12 years old right now. And I already know there's some boring insects in there. I think I'm going to get some fruit this year, but I also have the new peach tree standing right next to it growing already. So my hope is that it'll happen seamlessly. That's what I hope. The variety of peach that I have is called Alberta. Have you ever heard of this variety? Yeah. I love it. My only complaint about it is that sometimes the shell on the pit, you know what I'm talking about, it kind of splits a lot. So, yeah, and that can be a little gross when you're eating a peach and you end up with a mouthful of pit. Yeah, so that's my only complaint with that variety. Other than that, I think it is one of the best varieties. It's the same variety that I grew up with in California. We had a Alberta tree in my yard growing up. My dad had to go out there and prune it all the time. I remember that. And so now it's me doing the same thing. How much time? We're already over time, probably, right? Nope, there's the time. No, we're okay, right? We have 15 minutes, guys. I'm making some good progress. That's because you're keeping me on. I didn't talk about everything, so that's yeah, great. Okay, we're going to talk about figs. Who here absolutely hates figs? We got one hater here, another hater. Another hater. They're all on this side of the room. Oh, wait, anybody on this side? Okay, how many people love figs? And do we have any neutral parties? You really hate them, but you don't want to say. You know, it's a little like cilantro, right? So, you know, in a room of, we could do the same thing. All right, who's a cilantro hater? All right, let me see this. No cilantro hater. No, even in New Mexico, there are cilantro haters. I've come across a lot of them. Yeah. I love cilantro. Everybody else here loves it, right? Okay. Most rooms you'll find at least a few people that despise the stuff. They say it tastes like soap. And you know what I learned is that the cilantro haters are actually the ones who can taste it. The rest of us who love it, we can't really taste it. So it's whatever. It's genetic, yeah, some genetic thing. I don't know. Anyway, I'm glad we don't have any cilantro haters here. But I was a little sorry to hear that we've got so many fig haters. It's predictable. It's predictable. Okay, figs are phenomenal, even if you don't like them. They are phenomenal. I personally think that's one of the most wonderful fruit to eat that exists. I have a fig tree. It's the variety I have is it's called Violette de Bordeaux, and I picked that variety because I had the pleasure of going to the germplasm repository fig collection in Davis, California one time, and they had an open house there. And really what it is, it's like a library of fig varieties. They have every variety known to humankind. Hundreds, and they were all ripe. And at the end of the tour, you know, when they explained all the fancy schmancy science they're doing there, they said, you know what, go ahead and help yourself to whatever you want here. And it was incredible. So if you get a chance to go on that tour of the germplasm repository in Davis, California, it's actually closer to Winters, California, do it. It is so worthwhile. But let's talk about figs. So figs are related to mulberries. They're really quite similar in appearance. So if you look at the leaves, you can see the family resemblance. The fruit's kind of quite different. And the fruit of a fig is inside out, okay? And actually it's an infructescence, all right? So I told you what an inflorescence is. An inflorescence is really a clump of flowers on the tree, right? I told you about the catkins or the tassels, you know, that's the male flower inflorescence of a pecan tree, right? There's a whole bunch of flowers on there, right? Well, the same thing for a fig. There's an inflorescence that turns into an infructescence. Okay, so infructescence is a little clump of fruits. So when you're eating a fig, the actual, botanically, what's the fruit are these little guys on the inside right there. You know what I'm talking about? When you bite into it, you see the little fruitlets on the inside. And that's why it's inside out. So if you look at a mulberry, all the little fruitlets are on the outside. On a fig, they're on the inside of that thing that looks like the fruit. Is that weird or what? That's weird, huh? Yeah, pretty awesome. Yeah, okay, so what else is interesting about figs? Okay, figs are pollinated by wasps, but most of the time that doesn't even matter. The varieties that are popular, the varieties that you're going to have in your yard, there's no pollination needed at all. Okay, these are, they're parthenocarpic. Okay, so parthenocarpic fruits are fruits that they form without pollination. Okay, no pollination. Now they don't necessarily produce a viable seed. Some parthenocarpic fruits do produce viable seed. In this case, I don't think so. They're hardy enough for our area. They don't have much of a chill requirement. They're good in that respect. But now let's talk about the wasps. Even though it's not going to matter most of the time, it's so interesting we can't not talk about it. We can't not talk. That's a double negative. We have to talk about it. Some of the most important commercial fig varieties, there was one called Calamurna that was popular in California. It was the one that went into the fig Newtons. Calamurna is a Smyrna type fig variety. So Smyrna figs require pollination. That means you need to have a capra fig tree, so it's a tree that produces the pollen, much like the male trees in a pistachio orchard would. And you need your Calamurna trees or your Smyrna fig trees, but you need that wasp to take the pollen from the male tree to the female tree. And what that wasp does, she gets pollen on herself, and she crawls into the fig, and she raises her family inside of there. Okay, she lays eggs, and then the little babies get it, and they leave. She doesn't leave. She hangs out there, okay? And then she eventually dies, and the chemicals inside of the fruit, there's acids and stuff. She gets dissolved. You don't see any insect parts in there. But here's a question, guys. I want you all to think about this. If you eat one of these figs that's got that needs the fig pollination, one of these, is there such thing as a vegan fig? What do you think, guys? No vegan figs. Yeah, that's right. Right, vegan means you can't have any animal product in it, right? So, anyway, just a question for y'all to think about. All right, so every time you're eating a fig Newton, you just remember that fig Newtons are so good. They're not really. I like to get the ones now. They're not called Newton anymore. The ones that come in a blue and there's a red package. There's the raspberry ones and the blueberry ones, and those are good. A red colored fig? Is it red on the inside or red on the outside? Outside. Wow, okay. I got 3 crops left. We could go on and on about figs and all the interest. So figs produce more than one crop in a year. Yeah, so I'm glad you brought that up. We got to talk about it. So right now, if you have a fig tree, if you go to your fig tree, you should see there's little figlets. That's not what they're technically called, but the little figs on there, and those are figs that started developing last year already. They overwintered, and they're going to grow into some fruit. They will grow into enormous fruit most of the time. A lot of varieties, the figlets that you see right now, they're going to grow into great big figs. Okay, great big figs. Those in Spanish and a lot of European countries, they actually treat them as a separate fruit altogether from fig. So if you go to Spain, they say these are brevas, and that's that overwintering crop of figs. They're not figs. I think higo, H-I-G-O, is fig in Spanish, right? Does anybody know? Yeah, higo, right? So higo is a regular fig. That's the one. That's that later smaller fruit. The earlier ones are called breva in Spain. I don't think they do that in other Spanish-speaking countries. I think it's just in Spain. Yeah, my wife, she was visiting with a friend of hers in Murcia, Spain, And the brevas were for sale at the, and so my wife said, yeah, these are figs. And in English, that's correct. But her friend would not have it. She said, no, those are not figs. They are not figs. Well, it came from a fig tree. Yes, it came from a fig tree, but it's not a fig. It's a breva. All right. What now? Mission. You got a mission fig. Yep, that's a very popular variety is mission. Yep.
And how long does that take to produce?
You know what? You should probably have a few figs in a year or two, I would say. It can take 7 years sometimes before you get a lot of figs. Most people are not too satisfied with having one fig off of their tree. It could take a few years. Gets 20 feet high? Yep, that's right. Mission's a very popular variety. I believe that's a Spanish variety. There's another variety called brown turkey that's very popular. I told you the one I have is Violette de Bordeaux. It's a French variety. Yeah, there's a lot of great, some of them have just gorgeous fruit. There's one called panache. Have you ever seen panache figs? They have alternating lime green and dark green stripes on the fruit, and then it's beautiful strawberry pink on the inside. Is gorgeous fruit. Yeah. Panache. Yeah. I don't think it's really known for being one of the most flavorful and wonderful, in terms of the flavor, but just the aesthetics of it are phenomenal. Yeah. Speaking of aesthetics, I already brought this up. Pomegranate, one of the best fruits that we can grow in New Mexico. I think very tolerant to our environment. If you don't water it for a while, it tends to be pretty forgiving about that. It's a plant that comes from Central Asia, from places like Iran and Afghanistan, so an environment not too different from parts of New Mexico. You don't need to plant more than one variety, but that can sometimes help with the number of fruit. But I have never met a backyard fruit grower who has said, oh, I need more than one pomegranate tree to meet my pomegranate fruit consumption. Most people get way more fruit than they need. It's a small tree. Yeah, you can make them more shrubby. A lot of times they'll have kind of a multiple trunks if you let it get that. So you're right. But where does the definition of shrub start, and where does tree begin? I would say that some of them get to be more tree-like if you once they get a little bit bigger. It can self-pollinate, yeah. Self-pollination's okay. Yep. But you probably, if you're really trying to maximize the production, then yeah, you probably need to plant more than one variety. Okay. Persimmon. I planted a persimmon tree just this year. Well, let's talk about a few things here. So this is it's a great kind of a fruit tree that most of us don't really even know. How many have never tasted a persimmon? Oh, well, you guys have, yeah. So we do have, I look like less than 25% of us are in that category of never having tasted a persimmon. Persimmon it's an interesting fruit, and for some it would be kind of I don't know, a learned, like figs, you have to kind of work to enjoy it. You have to kind of, maybe might be some textural things you have to kind of deal with. But what's interesting about persimmon is that there are two different kinds of varieties in the regular common persimmon. So the regular common persimmon is an Asian species, and there are two different kinds of varieties. You can group them into the astringent varieties and the non-astringent varieties. Do you all know what astringent means? No? Okay. All right. Have you ever, like if you take a banana that's really green and really hard, right? Do you know that feeling like there's cotton in your mouth? You know what I'm talking about? That's astringent. Or, I don't know, do we have any wine drinkers in the room? We do? Nobody's admitting it? Okay, so I'm a wine drinker, I'll admit it. Okay, I like wine. You know that if you so for those of you who know what I'm talking about, if you ever have like a Zinfandel, like a Zinfandel wine, one of those old vine Zinfandels, right? The dark, dark wine. That you get that same kind of it feels like almost like cottony on your mouth. That's astringency. Okay, those are tannins that are doing that. There's kind of chemicals in the wine, or chemicals in the banana, or chemicals in the persimmon that cause that sensation in your mouth. Okay, that's astringency. In a nice Zinfandel wine, that's pleasant to a certain level, but if it got really bad, it would not be pleasant. And the same is true, I think, with a banana. I hate green bananas. Ugh. And it's mostly because of that sensation you get in your mouth, right? Now, with an astringent persimmon, take that banana sensation or that Zinfandel wine sensation, multiply it by 10 gazillion, and that is what you're experiencing, okay? So it is the most awful thing you will have ever, everybody should try this once. It's really very interesting, but awful, okay? I'm exaggerating to say it's the most awful thing in the world. There's worse things in the world, but it's bad. It really is bad. You put that thing in your mouth. Will it grow here? Yes. Yes, they will grow. This is, yeah, it's a very nice. People refer to the persimmons like a tomato growing on. They're growing on a vine. No, they're pretty different from tomato. Yeah. Well, just the look of it. Yeah, they do look a little like a tomato. Yeah, yeah. And in fact, that's one of the ways you can tell the astringent varieties apart from the non-astringent. A lot of the non-astringent varieties have more of a squat, like they look like one of those big beefsteak tomatoes. They're orange. They're not red like a tomato, but they're flat on the bottom. You can buy the non-astringent ones if you go to Walmart or Albertsons, and in the fall they'll sell you the non-astringent persimmons. There's a non-astringent persimmon variety called Fuyu. It's not a bad word. That's the name of the variety. It's that's the non-astringent, right? So it's Fuyu is the way it's spelled. Okay, and there's the astringent variety. The one that's most common is called the Haikia. You'll see most of these have Asian names, right? So Japanese names in this case, and so it has more of a point, more of an acorn shape. So it doesn't really look like a tomato very much. So the more tomato we look, and that one. This guy right here, that's a Haikia shape fruit, okay? So y'all gonna try this sometime? Try to taste an astringent persimmon? So now you're all saying, well, why would anybody grow these things if they're so nasty? If they're so... Yeah, they grow here, yeah. Huh. So you can, with the astringent ones, they don't stay that way if you ripen them after you pick them. So there's picking ripe, and then there's eating ripe. With the Fuyu persimmons, you can eat them, picking ripe equals eating ripe. Not so with the astringent ones. With the astringent ones, you can put them in the freezer. We talked about the bledding process, doing that with, what was it, quince. You can do that with persimmons, and that can relieve the astringency. Okay, and you can also, there's another approach is to just leave it on the counter. In any event, when it is eating ripe, it is mushy. It turns into the nastiest, goopy kind. That means it's ready to eat. And they are delicious, absolutely delicious, when they turn to kind of a snotty texture. It's, yeah, gross, but so good, okay? What's that? No, has anybody actually tried it? Okay, so it's like snot, right? Yes. See? They would grow wild, and you didn't eat them until after the hard freeze, and then they were delicious. Yep. Very soft. And what's the texture? Go ahead and say it. Like an overripe banana. Like snot. Yes. He says I'm using the wrong words, but I tell you what, I see everybody who's tried it, they're all going, oh yeah, no, that's right. Well, right. So Right. So let me clarify. The non-astringent ones can be eaten crisp. So texture is a big problem with and I'm not a salesman for this, as you pointed out. But I actually the flavor is phenomenal, and they're usually used in baked goods because they just can't abide the gross texture. It is too gross. Yeah. Somebody back here had a question or a comment. Oh, I am. Well, I look. I'm talking about persimmons again. Yeah. Yeah.
I never had papaya before until a couple weeks ago,
Oh.
and that's what I would say that the persimmon.
I would say, so papaya has a lot of people, and maybe this is going to be just like our cilantro discussion a moment ago. Papaya has sort of an odd smell to it that does not exist with persimmon. But yeah, I think you're right. The color's similar, and there are some similarities to papaya. Yeah.
I want to ask you a while ago, when you were talking, did you actually compare, almonds to?
Peaches. Oh yeah, yeah. They're yeah. Oh, let me repeat the question for our people who are online. The question go ahead, ask the question.
Oh, well, I had asked if you had actually compared the walnuts to peaches.
Oh, not walnuts, almonds.
Almonds, yes.
Almonds,
I'm sorry.
yes, right. So I want you all, next time you have a peach, okay, so get a nice peach from the store, and I want you to save the pit and take a hammer, because it's going to be really hard. Crack that thing open and look on the inside. Okay, don't eat it, guys, don't eat it. It's not good to eat, okay? But look at it.
So the comparison that you're doing is the seed?
Well, what I'm telling you is these guys are related to each other, and they're so closely related to each other, you can hybrid. So you know how a horse and a donkey are related to each other?
Yes.
They look a little bit alike, but you can tell the difference. You can hybridize a horse and a donkey, and you get a mule. These guys, the peach and the almond are so closely related, you can hybridize them, but they're more closely related than a horse and a donkey because the offspring is fertile.
And the reason I'm asking is because when I was a teenager, I went to Stockton to visit my
I
grandfather.
grew up very near Stockton.
And he had almond trees,
Yeah.
which looked like little green peaches.
Peaches, yeah.
But they were open, and it's the almond. It comes out. They had laid tarps so it could, and I thought, this is a.
They look like peaches.
These peach trees are sick. That's
Yeah.
what I thought. They
Yep.
weren't no good, but they were almonds.
Right, so all of you who didn't believe me, we just have the proof right there. Look at that. Woo! It's weird, huh? All right.
Do you want to cover olives, and then maybe we have a few minutes for questions? Richard,
I do.
Would that be good?
There's olives. There's jujubes. I want to actually talk about jujubes.
Yeah.
I have an olive tree too, but let's talk about jujubes.
I have a question on olives.
Okay, olives.
Can we plant olives here?
Yes.
And get fruits?
Yes. The question is, can you plant olive trees and get fruit? The answer is yes. I don't recommend that anybody plant these as a commercial crop, but as a backyard crop, you can absolutely do this. Yeah, it's a little too cold in the winter to do this commercially. Yep. I have an olive tree. The one I planted is the variety Picual. I talked to Jeff Anderson, and I think Manzanillo is the variety that he recommended. I didn't plant Manzanillo. How many of you know Jeff? You guys know Jeff? All right, a lot of people know Jeff. If you don't know Jeff, go meet him sometime. He's our extension county agent, agriculture agent. So go meet him sometime. Anyway, he suggested I plant Manzanillo. I think it's Manzanilla or Manzanillo. I think it's Manzanillo is the name of the variety. It's a big olive. The reason I didn't is because as I was researching varieties, this one seems to have a pollination requirement and Picual doesn't. Picual is a much smaller fruit. Picual is the most common oil variety from Spain. And so that's what I've planted. It's a variety that does well here in New Mexico. So, yep. Any other questions about olives? So mine hasn't actually made any fruit yet, so I don't do anything yet. But there are multiple ways to cure olives. You can do it in salt. You can do it in brine. There's a number of different ways to do it. It's too late now because I think this story's already been ruined. But well, maybe not. So if ever you visit California, there's a thing that a local might say, you know what? Have you ever tried a fresh olive? And has anybody ever tried a fresh olive? Anybody? I have. Yeah, you have. So that's the thing. So the local Californians say, have you ever tried a fresh olive? And you might say, no. And so, well, you like olives, right? And they, oh yeah, I love olives. Oh, well, you have not tried an olive till you've tried a fresh olive right off the tree. And if you're the uninitiated, we'll go ahead and try it. And that whole thing that I talked about with the persimmon is true for an uncured olive too. It might even be a little bit worse. It's horrible. It's a nasty trick. It doesn't usually kill anybody, but it's one of those things where you kind of wish you were going to die. It's that bad. So, all right, that's enough on olives, because we got to talk about these guys, jujubes. So my dear colleague Xing Ri, she's based out of northern New Mexico. She works for New Mexico State University at the Alcalde Ag Science Center and at the Los Lunas Ag Science Center. She is a jujube expert, and you know what, I would almost say kind of a jujube fanatic as well. Jujubes are really an odd fruit in a lot of ways, but they grow so well here in New Mexico, including here in southern New Mexico. They're originally from China. They're often called Chinese date, but they're not related to the date. You know, dates grow on palm trees. This is not a palm tree. It's actually let's see if I have a picture. It's a very lovely tree. They're beautiful. The flower is not super spectacular unless you get a magnifying glass out, but it's a very nice green, lush-looking tree. But they really don't mind a little bit of drought stress once in a while, and they produce lots of fruit. The fruit, I have to say, it's not as good as some fruit, like figs, for example, but they're not bad. And sometimes, if you get the right variety and you pick it at the right stage, they actually are delicious. Okay, they'll have a pit in them, just like an olive does. It's one pit usually, although the tree that they recently cut down on the university campus, it would make a lot of fruit that had no pit in it at all. It's just a seedless fruit. One cool thing about this is when it's dormant, it has this kind of a zigzaggy branch structure that's kind of interesting. And sometimes there's ladybugs on it. So back to this, they're often eaten dried. That's a really common way. I haven't ever seen this personally, but to give a sense of how well adapted this plant is for New Mexico, there's a train track that runs east and west, I think, past Tucumcari, New Mexico. Have you ever been to Tucumcari? So what grows in Tucumcari? Any idea? Nothing. Tucumcari it's a rough part of the world for plants, but that train track. I think that line exists from probably the late 1800s, and there's a spot there near the train tracks where there's a wild forest of jujubes. Now, jujubes don't come from North America; they come from China. So, and that little forest of jujubes just grows wild in Tucumcari of all places. How do you suppose that got there? Any theories? Railroad workers. That's my theory. I don't know if it's true or not, but it sure does seem likely. So anyway, that gives you a little sense of this. So this plant, there's probably, of all the plants that we talked about, I don't think there's any of them that is as well adapted to New Mexico as this thing, including southern New Mexico. So with that, I think I'll wrap it up here. Oh man, look at the citrus. Yes.
My family actually has a whole bunch of jujube trees that only grow at my grandma's house, and they pop up everywhere all the time.
Like weeds.
Yes, but we have never been able, nobody's been ever able to take one, like to dig a little one, to transplant it or anything, but it'll pop up everywhere, and my grandma's constantly having to pull them out and throw them away because they'll get too close to the house or they're growing in the wrong place, but we can't. Nobody can take it out of the yard or put it in a pot.
You know what might be going on here is those might actually be suckers. So there's two possibilities. One is that the fruit are falling to the ground and a seed is growing up. I think that's what you think is happening, and that's possibly what it is. The other possibility is that there are suckers coming up from the roots. So some jujube varieties are really prone to suckering. Yeah, and so I think that's what's going on. Is you pull them up and that root is still there. It's attached to a great big tree somewhere. I think that's what's happening. And that's going to continue to happen until that big tree is removed.
Do we have any other questions? Ray?
I need to analyze my soil for salts and minerals. Where can I send it?
Yeah. So what I would probably do is send it to a private lab right now. So New Mexico State University used to have a laboratory called the SWAT lab. And in about 2008, they shut that down because of funding problems. And so currently, that was a paid for service at New Mexico State. So currently, you can still get analyses done, but not at New Mexico State. You send it to a private lab. So Ward Lab is one example of a lab that I use for analyses. They're in Nebraska. Yeah. So now I have good news though, is that there is that we're going to open up a lab again on campus. So it's not going to be free. It'll probably be a few years, maybe a couple years before it'll be up and running. But the lab is in the plans, and it should be up and running before too long. Yeah. So right now, I would just send it to Ward or to another private lab. There's another one called De La Valle. Is in California. There's other labs too. So.
Leslie, do we have any questions online? Did you want to say anything about this last slide, Dr. Hirama?
I want to, but I'm not allowed to because I'm out of time.
Do you want one more minute to do that, and then we'll close?
So I don't know. What do you guys think? Do you want to hear about citrus? You're all right? Okay. Well, let's talk about citrus. So how many people think you cannot grow citrus in New Mexico?
I got one in my house right now.
Is it in your house or is it?
It's in the house. We haven't got it out.
So listen to this. I have a mandarin orange tree outside in my backyard, planted in the ground. I don't have to, there's no greenhouse. I don't cover it in the winter. Yes, you can grow citrus outdoors in Las Cruces. I live, it's the old country club neighborhood. There's no country club. It makes it sound like I live in a fancy place, but it's not. Absolutely. So now here's the thing is it's all about genetics. You have to get not the people's genetics, it's the plant's genetics. You have to pick a plant that's genetically adapted to the environment you put it in. And it turns out that some citrus varieties they grow up in pretty cold places, and some citrus varieties grow in really warm places. So you have to pick one that's hardy. Now, there's quite a lot of hardy citrus. The one I planted it's a Satsuma mandarin, so that's a Japanese type mandarin, and they're among the more hardy of the orange type fruit that are out there. It's got a few seeds in it, so it's not completely seedless. The variety that I have is a variety called Arctic Frost. It's a variety that was released by Texas A&M at one point, and that's actually my fruit in my yard, and it has lots of flowers on it this year. I'm expecting a really good citrus crop this year from my yard, and it's a good sized tree. So there's I can't remember the name of the nursery. There's a nursery somewhere back east that has lots of citrus, hardy citrus varieties. It's not that one. No, I'd have to look it up. What the name of the But they don't have Arctic Frost. I don't know where to find Arctic Frost. But there's a lot of different citrus that are. These are two different species a kumquat. Have you ever eaten a kumquat? Who here has had that? So. So you all tell me, what's weird about that fruit? You eat the whole thing, right? So that's weird. Yeah, absolutely. But what else is weird about when you eat that whole thing? What's so unusual about it? Super tart. But sweet, right? So what's interesting on this one is the rind on it is where all the sugar is, right? It is. If you ate just the rind, it would taste really sweet. But then you got this thing, and it's it'll eat the enamel right off your teeth. It's so tart. If you eat the whole thing, it's edible. But the skin is sweet, and so you eat the whole thing. It's really kind of. And this is definitely hardy. These are among the hardiest of the citrus. So kumquat, definitely. Calamondin is pretty hardy. There's a kind of a grapefruit sort of a thing called, what's it called? There's a sort of a grapefruit, so I'd have to look it up again. So Jeff Anderson is a huge fan of citrus. He will tell you all about it, so call him up sometime, ask him about it. So, all right, what do you think? Is that it?
I think that's super. I just wanted to ask you a quick question.
Okay.
I want to do the peach tree thing like what you're doing, because I know my peach tree's on its way out. How close can I plant the new peach tree to my old peach tree, would you say?
You need to give it a little bit of room. Okay, so there's two reasons for that. One is the competition with the top. You don't want it to shade out the top of your tree. So you don't want that to happen. But what's going on underground is probably more important.
Yeah.
There's you know what a nematode is? Who knows what a nematode is? Yeah. What's a nematode? Small worm in the soil. That's very small. They're microscopic. You can't really see the worm, but you can see the damage they're doing to roots. Have you ever dug up a tomato plant or something, and you notice all the little nodules all over like little tumors all over the root? You ever seen that? That's happening on almost every peach tree that we have, unless it's on a nemogard rootstock. When you plant your little tree next to it, it's going to pick up nematodes from your old tree. And so plant it a little ways away. Yeah, I would say probably no closer than 15 feet to the tree that you currently have. Yeah.
Everybody, can we give a huge round of applause to Dr. Hirama?
Thank you guys for being such a good audience. I talked about a lot of stuff that's completely useless. So, and you sat through it patiently, and I loved it. So.
But then you got to the good stuff, so it was
Okay, good.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Please come next week. We've got an amazing presentation by Extension Weed Specialist Leslie Beck on weeds and taking care of those. And Miss Gloria is at the back of the room ready to accept your evaluation form. Thank you for a wonderful evening, all of you, especially Dr. Hirama.
All right, this was fun. Good stuff.